This talk is unwise intention, the second factor of the Noble Eightfold Path. On any journey, we begin with clarity about where is it I want to go, and our practice, the reason we're doing any of this, is that where we are aiming for is happiness, peace, freedom from suffering. And the inquiry that we all have on our practice is what leads to happiness and peace, what interferes with it. And the Noble Eightfold Path is the path. It's sort of the description that the Buddha offers us of how to get to, how to achieve happiness and peace, and sort of a summary of what sorts of things don't or won't take us there. Siddhartha, before he became the Buddha, had the very same inquiry. He himself had a pretty happy and comfortable life. He had good food, a secure and happy family, a wife whom he loved and who shared his spiritual interests. He had pleasant surroundings and activities, and there was relative peace in his external world. He saw, though, the tendency of the mind to try to hang on to these things by constant struggle to try to perfect or increase or simply sustain them. He came to see the mind's constant struggle to try to avoid whatever is unpleasant, or at least to try to ignore it. And through his years of inquiry and practice, and there were many years, he came to see that complete and unshakable happiness is not only possible, but it's a birthright for each of us, no matter what our past or present circumstance. Indeed, he teaches that it's already imminent, it's already actively available to us in each and every moment. And through ignorance, the mind thinks and the body acts in ways that obscure that quality of knowing that is available to us at every moment, the knowing of peace and complete happiness. Cognitively, emotionally, happiness and peace can seem impossible, at least in this way, this full and complete happiness and peace. And at the same time, we're drawn toward it. We're drawn toward the light. Something about this practice just seems right, and we're sort of drawn toward it. We keep inquiring, investigating. So the Buddha offered this Eightfold Path, and we could go around and around with it, repeating the inquiry over and over, and it keeps unfolding as we see it in different ways and understand its teachings more and more deeply. The awareness that it offers becomes more and more subtle. Happiness and peace are more and more realized. It's a gradual awakening. And I can't tell you how many times one of my friends or even myself has said during a time that was very difficult, what on earth would we do without our meditation practice? How do people manage? How do people navigate these kinds of difficulties without a meditation practice? So the Eightfold Path is divided into three parts. The first part is the wisdom part, wise intention and wise view. The second part is the virtue part, speech, wise action, and wise livelihood. And the third part is called a concentration or tranquility part that speaks to wise effort and wise mindfulness and wise concentration. And so last week and this week, we're speaking to the first part, the wisdom part. Pat spoke last week about wise view, understanding what we are about. And this week it's on wise intention, how to aim our energies, how to direct our energies wisely. When I gave the overview of the Eightfold Path, I offered a traveling metaphor. And the metaphor was sort of understanding where we are going, which in this case is toward complete happiness and freedom. And the Eightfold Path is like the travel book. It's how to get there and how to aim ourselves accordingly. So wise intention. Classically, there are three aspects of wise intention. Cultivating a mind of 1, renunciation, letting go, 2, kindness, non-hatred, and 3, compassion or non-harming. I want to talk primarily about renunciation. The others are maybe a little more easy to understand. We tend to think of renunciation as just giving up objects, like giving up chocolate cake during Lent when I was a child, or, kind of white-knuckling it and giving something up. And renunciation doesn't really mean that. It's built on wise view that Pat talked about, that pleasant objects and unpleasant objects, they come and they go. Impermanence, nothing lasts. The pleasant doesn't last. The unpleasant doesn't last. And even things that are neutral, neither pleasant nor unpleasant, they don't last either. Our sensory responses, our mind states, including our emotions, even very strongly conditioned ones, they don't last. So internally, experience doesn't last. Externally, events, people, actions, reactions, they arise and pass away. They don't last. Renunciation is about really coming into a relationship with this quality of impermanence. It's about not rejecting things that arise. And it's also about learning to let go of trying to hang on to them. So internally or externally, not rejecting, not trying to hang on. Cultivating the capacity to let go of the past and to let go of the future. Let go of planning for the future. Being here, just here. Delighting in the chocolate cake when it's present, and being fine with the absence of chocolate cake when it's ended, when it's finished. Cultivating the awareness that it's like this right now. This is how it is. It's like this right now. When we let go of clinging, we can see more clearly what response is needed. We don't have to figure out how to respond, but the responses that are actually available to us become more evident. What also arises is great tenderness. So with renunciation, those second two factors, or the second two qualities of wise intention, of loving kindness and compassion, they tend to just open and arise automatically when there's renunciation. Think of the last time when you attended a funeral of a dear friend, and this sort of tenderness of appreciation and care that arose when you're just sort of there with the sense of loss. It's like this right now. There's a quote from Thanissaro. He says, "What sort of sacrifices are intelligent?" The Buddhist answer to this question resonates with another American principle. An intelligent sacrifice is any in which you gain a greater happiness by letting go of a lesser one. In the same way, you'd give up a bag of candy if offered a pound of gold in exchange. In other words, an intelligent letting go is like a profitable trade. This analogy is an ancient one in the Buddhist tradition. Thanissaro goes on, he says, "There's something in all of us, though, that would rather not give things up. We'd prefer to imagine that we can keep the candy and get the gold." So renunciation is cultivating a mind that's willing to let things go as they move along, as they're impermanent, and a mind that is available to what is here, now, this. This is how it is. Again, I want to make a note about the word wise before each of these path factors. Wise view, wise intention, wise speech. So very often the word in Pali, which is sama, is translated as right. So it'd be right view, right intention, right speech, right effort, right concentration. But I struggle with the translation as right because in my own mind, my own child's view of commandments, it's sort of like a rule about, how you have to be. And that's really not the intention of the Eightfold Path. It's more like if I'm wanting to go to France, which is the right or wise train to take if I want to get to Paris? It's not like, other trains are bad or wrong. It's just if I want to get to a particular place, in this case, happiness, what is the right intention? What is the wise intention to cultivate in order to get where I'm trying to go? So wise intention, how we train our minds. As with any cultivation, the inclination of our mind matters. You've heard us speak of, quote this quote from the Buddha, mind is the forerunner of all things. Mind is their master. They are mind-made. Speak or act with an impure mind, and sorrow will follow you, as surely as the wheel follows the ox that draws the cart. Mind is the forerunner of all things. Mind is their master. They are all mind-made. Speak or act with a pure mind, and happiness will follow you as your shadow, unshakable. So our practice is to learn to use our minds in wise ways that will guide our journey well and that will get us where we're trying to go. The Buddha also uses a gardening metaphor. He invites us to consider, first of all, the kinds of seeds we plant in our minds, which will bear fruit in our lives and in our relationships. Here's what he says in the Pali Canon. He says, according to the seed that's sown, so is the fruit you reap therefrom. Doer of good will gather good. Doer of evil, evil reaps. Down is the seed, and thou shalt taste the fruit thereof. So it's true that intention, or the seed, isn't everything, even in gardening. But without intention, there's no movement in that direction. So with gardening, there are many conditions, of course, that determine the actual outcome. Weather, temperature, soil conditions, how many deer and raccoons I have foraging in my yard. Many causes and conditions beyond the seed. But nevertheless, seeds matter. If I want to harvest tomatoes, it helps a great deal to start with a tomato seed. This is sort of the essence of the teachings of karma, that how we aim our minds and what we start with really matters. This is actually from a neuroscientist, not from a Buddhist teacher. He says, this is Daniel Amen. He says, most people don't understand how important thoughts, or the seeds of our actions, are. Did you know that every thought you have sends electrical impulses throughout your brain? Thoughts have actual physical properties. When your mind is burdened with many negative thoughts, it affects your very deep limbic system and causes deep limbic problems like irritability, moodiness, and depression. Teaching yourself to control and direct thoughts and intentions in a positive way is one of the most effective ways to feel better. And Dan Siegel, another neuroscientist, talks about the effect of paying attention to intention. So attention to intention. He talks about the effect of paying attention to intention has on our brain and thus our experience of our surroundings. He writes, intentions create an integrated state of priming, a gearing up of our neural system to be in the mode of that specific intention. We can be readying to receive, to sense, to focus, to behave in a certain manner. So cultivating the mental capacity to have the intention to let go of craving for what isn't, and clinging to mind states that try to hang on to lesser, often imagined happiness, is what wise intention is about. Cultivating these mental capacities to let go. It's what renunciation is about. It sounds good, but it's not a simple or idle thing. Our minds can be quite convinced that clinging is a wholesome way to go. So wise intention relentlessly invites investigation and curiosity. Our mind wants to say, if sensory pleasure is a goodness, if chocolate cake or more strawberries is a goodness, then maybe clinging to it, hanging on, being upset when there isn't any more, will be even better. Our mind wants to say, if having certain perceptions or views or ideas that help us to organize information, then we must hang on to those. If it's good to have certain perceptions or views that help us organize information, that we must hang on to those. And it's not entirely crazy, because sensory pleasure, perceptions, and narratives and stories that we tell ourselves are all useful in their own ways. That's actually the subject of another talk. But it's the craving and the clinging the Buddha teaches us that are the problem. Yet we still cling to each of them and fall out of the present moment and into mind states that are not wholesome. We keep insisting on trying to make life work out on our own terms. So wise intention is cultivating mind states of a willingness to let go into the present moment, to see how it is here, now, not how we wish it were or hope it will be, not how it used to be or it might be in the future, but this is how it is right now, and to allow kindness and compassion to surface, to let go of a mind that tries to make life always pleasant when it is not, to make things last when they don't, and to try to have personal control over the unfoldings of life when I don't have that kind of control. I want to tell you a story about a difficult experience I had that brought up an opportunity for renunciation. Many of you know that I travel frequently to Bali, and some of the legs of those airline flights are really quite long. And on one of my recent flights, I boarded the airplane for what was to be a 14-hour flight. And usually, because the flight is so long, I'm pretty careful to reserve an aisle seat, because I just get a little antsy if I'm not in an aisle seat for such a long flight. So as I boarded the plane, and I came to my seat, I saw that it was already partially occupied by a woman who was quite large, quite overweight, and who was wearing a burqa. I was on my way to Doha, Qatar, a Muslim country, and so there was a Muslim woman, obviously a Muslim woman, who was sitting next to me, and in fact occupying a part of my seat, about a quarter of my seat. It was a really rather substantial portion. And so my mind just started to reel with all the ways that was unfair and unjust, and how was I going to manage this whole 14-hour flight where I was already stuck in economy class, and now I was going to be cramped even further. And so my mind started to get really quite agitated. And as I sat down, I became quite determined that I was going to claim my entire seat. And so I kind of plunked myself down with quite a bit of energy and kind of wiggled around a little bit, trying to kind of claim my space. And it soon became apparent that this poor woman had absolutely no place to go. Her body was as big as it was. She was kind of stuffed into this middle seat, and there really was no room for her to go anywhere. except overflowing into my seat. So this is how it is right now. This is how it is. And I soon saw that I needed to get control of my mind and work with my mind, or it was going to be a very long flight indeed. A 14-hour flight was going to turn into one that was even more miserable than I had anticipated. So as I worked with my mind and really kind of practiced with this is how it is. There were no other seats available on the airplane. It was a full flight. There was no place for me to go. So this is how it is. Somehow or other, I need to deal with this. And I was able to come into a bit of calm and to kind of settle into an awareness that, okay, this is how big my seat is going to be for the duration of this flight, and calm my mind. And as I did, I realized that actually what I had was a very large pillow next to me. And so I kind of just settled in and settled in onto this pillow and kind of relaxed, and the lights went out, and after a time we both slept. And it was really kind of sweet that I had this really sweet pillow next to me. Toward the end of the flight, I started to talk a little bit with my seatmate, and even though she couldn't speak very much English and I didn't speak any Arabic, but we spoke just a little bit. I learned that she was on her way home from visiting her son, who was in school in Baltimore. And she was on her way home to Pakistan, and she was the principal of a school in Pakistan. And so we had a sweet little connection, a sweet little talk. And then we came to the end of the flight and we said goodbye. And then after we disembarked in Qatar, I was in the airport and I saw her. And she looked kind of confused and lost, and I went up to her and asked her, and she was really kind of puzzled about how to navigate the airport, so I helped her find her gate. And the whole thing actually turned into a very sweet connection with her. And as we were parting, she looked at me very directly, and she said, I will keep you in my heart and in my prayers. And I looked at her and I almost cried. I said, the same is true for me. It was just a very dear connection. I too will keep you in my heart and in my prayers. And indeed, I think of her even to this day in much that way. Whenever I hear stories about Pakistan and schools in Pakistan, I wonder how Amira is doing. So the whole sequence of events there was guided by my willingness to rest with the seed of renunciation, of letting go of my ideas, my perceptions, my ideas, my stories about how things should be, about what I needed in order to be okay, about what was fair and what was just, but to let go into the moment of, oh, it's like this now. Regardless of what those ideas are and how legitimate they are, it's not like that. This is how it is. And so I had an intention to really come into the present moment, which actually, even without the beautiful connection that Amira and I made, even before then, it made the flight perfectly navigable and fine. I didn't suffer, even though I did, in fact, not have full access to the entire seat that I had paid for. So renunciation, a willingness to let go of whatever blocks us from being in the present moment. The Buddha said there are two kinds of suffering: suffering that leads to more suffering, and suffering that leads to the end of suffering. So renunciation invites us to remember that when we encounter suffering, it's possible for it to lead not to more suffering, but to the end of suffering. So the intention to let go of the additional suffering. What is happening right now, we might ask? What is needed? How can I respond to this, with wisdom, which includes kindness and care for the suffering of the world, and which includes myself? Here's a quote from Pema Chodron. She says, renunciation does not have to be regarded as negative. You could say that renunciation is the same thing as opening to the teachings of the present moment. When we sit in meditation, we feel our breath as it goes out, and we have some sense of willingness just to be open to the present moment. Then our minds wander off into all kinds of stories and fabrications and manufactured realities, and we say to ourselves, it's thinking. We say that with a lot of gentleness and a lot of precision. Every time we are willing to let the storyline go, and every time we are willing to let go at the end of the out-breath, that's fundamentally renunciation. Learning how to let go of holding on and holding back. So renunciation is seeing clearly how we hold back, how we pull away, how we shut down, how we close off, and then learning how to open. It's about saying yes to whatever is put on your plate, whatever knocks at your door, whatever calls you up on your telephone. So as we practice renunciation, the practice is letting go into awareness of what's happening in this moment. We're not letting go into the content. We're not kind of going belly up and saying, there's nothing I can do, I'm a victim of circumstance. We're letting go into the awareness of what's going on so that we can indeed see what responses are available to us. Renunciation is guided by the wise view that Pat spoke of toward two aspects of practice: discovering how things are in this moment, which is impermanence, not about getting anything right, whatever the object is, and then with insight we begin to see what our choices are. Indeed, that we have choices, the possibility that we can let go of what keeps us entangled in suffering. Freedom from suffering is possible. The path, the Noble Eightfold Path, shows us the way, shows us how. We cultivate, slowly for most of us, faith that this is true. So cultivating the practice, the intention toward letting go is a part of this Noble Eightfold Path. There's a poem by David White that I'd like to close with that seems to speak to this. He says, start close in. Don't take the second step or the third. Start with the first thing, close in, the step you don't want to take. Start with the ground you know, the pale ground beneath your feet, your own way of starting the conversation. Start with your own question. Give up other people's questions. Don't let them smother something simple. Start right now. Take a small step you can call your own. Don't follow someone else's heroics. Be humble and focused. Start close in. Don't mistake that other for your own. Start close in. Don't take the second step or the third. Start with the first thing, close in, the step you don't want to take. That's really what the Buddha's teachings on renunciation are inviting us. So be well, and let's sit for a moment.